right, everybody, we're going to get started. So glad that you are with us tonight, braving the mean city streets of St. Paul and snow emergency warnings. We've got till 9, though, so snow emergency is no issue for us here tonight. So we're in week 3 of our series on evangelism, and just to kind of review the last couple of weeks, if you haven't been with us or just as a way just to kind of review the point of the last couple of weeks that we've done things, that first session we had was really just on the need to be more fluent in the gospel. Like if we're going to share the good news, we actually have to have good news and know the good news. Otherwise, we're going to just share a lot of good advice with people and not a lot of actual gospel with people, unless we're really fluent in the gospel, know the gospel, are speaking the gospel to ourselves, then it's less likely, right, to be sharing the gospel with others. That was that first one. Big takeaway from the first one really is just our admonition would be get gospel fluent. Think gospel, talk gospel, pray gospel, work on the gospel. Week 2, we talked about loving the city, seeking the welfare of the city, and this kind of big idea then of really as Christians we're to be this positive force in the city, and the broad metro Twin Cities area when we're talking about the city, right? I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have to be involved in St. Paul. Not everybody has to be involved in Minneapolis. But the big takeaway, hopefully, and I didn't make it as strong or as clear probably last week, but really is that we should be involved in the city. Because we're gonna be involved in the things that we love. Our life reflects our loves. We're called to love the city, seek the welfare of the city. So if we're going to love the city, we got to be involved in the life of the city where we live. So really engaging and being involved within your city. That was week 2. So today, this week we wanted to talk more about practical evangelism. Like, what does it actually look like to do this work? What is it actually? What are the actual steps, so to speak, involved in this? Getting very practical to what does it look like within our day-to-day life? What does it look like for a family to do evangelism, to do hospitality? Becky is prepared to come up here as well tonight and share a little bit on the practical stuff too from her perspective. But as we talk about doing evangelism and some of the distinctiveness, like to our form of doing evangelism, like we were sharing over these few weeks, there's really 4 big things that are true for this kind of every member gospel ministry. Right, and this came out of that study we did a couple summers ago. And again, we printed out more of those. They're over there. And house churches will keep going through this study as well. But the thought is, right, like everybody, and that was kind of also last week. I mean, everybody's responsible for this work. It's not just evangelists, right? And the old models had a lot of emphasis put on 1 or 2 individuals who were really gifted, and then the goal was to get everybody to those events, get everybody to those services where they'll hear the gospel. Well, no, the biblical admonition is for us all to share the gospel, to share the good news, to be ready to give these things. So what does it look like then for this every member gospel ministry? So this comes out of Center Church, Tim Keller. He would argue that there's no formula, it's going to look different all the time with what it looks like within our different contexts, and we'll talk about that a little bit, of how it looks different for the Simmons family is going to look different than what it looks like for you guys. But within that, he would say there's always 4 things that are always present within an every member gospel ministry. 1, it'll always be organic, right? Meaning evangelism, if we're all engaged in this together, it's going to be spontaneous. It's just going to rise up in the relationships that we have outside of the church. Like if you're waiting on the church, if you're waiting on Twin Cities Church to do evangelism, right, you're going to be waiting a long time. We are called to evangelism, not the structured, organized church is called to this types of things. It will come organically, it'll come spontaneously in the relationships that we have in our spheres. That just goes to number 2. And it'll always be relational. We are going to have informal relationships, informal personal relationships where we're going to have opportunities to share the gospel. All of us have these. And this is where we're called to share the good news. There are always going to be word deploying, meaning it's in those informal personal relationships that we'll be able to share how God's word and how the gospel speaks to everyday life and to those people's lives and into our lives. And then it's active, not passive. Again, kind of meaning within this model, within this vision of evangelism, it's everybody is doing this. Everyone is active. You bring something rather than just consuming things when you come to church. Those older kind of models, and again, those models totally were fine for their time and their place. We don't feel called to those models of kind of seeker-sensitive services or big, kind of more Willow Creek type of things. We feel called to the house church model. We feel called to this every member gospel ministry model. But it requires a high level of activity. Everybody has responsibility in this model. It is a high buy-in, right? You can't just sit back and be a consumer in a house church, right? And if you've been in a house church for a long period of time, you realize this. Like, there needs to be this activity. I'm going to bring something when I show up. And that's going to be more and more present within this forms of evangelism. The second thing that I thought would be really helpful, before we get into a lot of the practical things too, was this just a recognition of like how people become Christians. And so it's helpful to kind of see that like nobody, like C.S. Lewis writes about this, of like nobody becomes a Christian or an atheist overnight. Like you don't really ever give somebody an argument of like, I don't think there's a God. Like, oh, wow, that's really good thought. Oh, you know what? I'm going to be an atheist. It doesn't happen. Nor is it kind of like, hey, I think you should believe in God. All right, that sounds great. All right, I'm going to be a Christian. It happens through these many decisions that happen. It gets you to a place where you're going to accept it or take it or understand it, but it's a long road for people to actually kind of get to that place. And that first step, as Tim kind of outlines, is the first step in the mini decision is I see it, this kind of general awareness. This would be kind of where you have a non-believing neighbor who sees you, knows you. Well, they don't seem to be a bad Christian. Huh. Okay, I get it. I see this person. I see what you're talking about, and I'm not turned off by it, right? I'm not against Christianity. I can see it in your life. Interesting, right? It hasn't hit relevance yet. Then it gets into this next level, like it starts with I see it, right? And this is where all non-believers, you have to see it. You have to see Christianity. You have to see the gospel played out and see people's lives. You have to see somebody who understands these things. And then it gets to this, I need it. And this would be like the types of statements or ideas of like, I can see why you would be a believer. I can see the advantages of this. Oh, that must be nice. There was one neighbor, this was an election back, but it kind of like, hey, it must be nice to not be so worked up about politics. I can see how what you believe could really be a good thing for that, right? Like, oh, okay, right? It's this like, I see it and I'm not turned off by it. Or like, okay, you're a Christian and I'm still going to be your friend. All right, I can also see why your Christianity has got some good things to it, or why a belief in Jesus would be a good thing and why it has that potential. And then it gets to that credibility place of like, and I'm starting to think this may in fact be true. Maybe there is a God. Maybe Jesus really did live. Maybe there really was this guy, right? Maybe he did have these teachings. I'm certainly ready to believe he died on the cross. I don't know how I feel about the resurrection yet, but it seems credible. Or like, oh, maybe you don't have to be, maybe it's possible to be smart and a Christian at the same time. Oh, maybe it's possible. Or you can start to see how this could be true and how it may in fact play out in your own life. And then you enter into a trial period where you kind of try on Christianity for a while. I think some of us know people like this in Twin Cities Church who are trying it on right now. You're like, I think I believe this. I think this is true. I'm going to try it out. And I'm going to see if this is true. I'm going to act like a Christian. I'm going to start praying, right? That's usually what this looks like for the first time. They start to pray, or they start to use Christian language for the first time, or they start to read a Bible for the first time, or they'll start coming to church services or coming to a house church for the first time. They start to try it on, hang out with Christians, act like Christians, be around Christians, try on Christianity. And then 5 and 6, this is where we really, more as evangelicals, think of like where the kind of conversion types of things happen. But it's a long road to get there to where like, all right, I'm now going to take that identity as my own. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. I'm a child of God. And that's a big aha moment. And it's also usually followed again, and many of us are at that point, and then many of us get to the, oh, now I really get it. I thought I got it. I thought I was a Christian. Oh, now I really get the gospel. Now I I feel convicted. Now, what I thought was the gospel wasn't, we've had those types of moments too. So it is like, and C.S. Lewis gives us nicely in Mere Christianity, how we really have a desire to put everybody in two camps, either the saved or the unsaved, and that's it. But this just isn't how humans work, and it isn't how any of us work. But we really are on these great continuums of growing in our faith and our understanding at some place. So it's not that your neighbor or your friend or your coworker is unsaved. It's more, do they need to see it? Do they need to see the relevance of it? Do they need to understand that it's credible? Like, where are they at in this? Not necessarily just to they're an unbeliever. Because again, back to that kind of like this pagan world that we live in, very few people don't believe in anything. So it is it's more, there's these many decisions that happen over time. And the trick with this, though, and I think what helps with Tim kind of laying this out, it's helpful because it also helps to remind us of the length it takes and the time it takes to become a Christian. Because this is the story of all of us, went through the same thing. We may have seen our parents have faith. We may have seen how it was good. We may have seen it in other people's lives. All of us come to faith, and it takes time. And so to have that kind of patience and time with others is helpful. So towards that, so if we see evangelism as coming to Christ as that series of many decisions, we see that kind of that it's spontaneous, it's relational, it's active, it's word deploying. Really then what we're trying to engage in is really developing non-superficial relationships with neighbors, colleagues, and others in the city. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what all of us should be doing. That's what the ministry is of this Every Member Gospel Ministry. You're really just trying to make friends with everybody in your spheres. Relationships with neighbors, relationship with colleagues, and relationships with others that you run into, which really looks like engagement. It takes intentional engagement with the culture. It takes intentional engagement with your neighbors. It takes intentional engagement with your colleagues that you work with your friends' kids, or your kids' friends' parents. It takes intentional engaging, entering into their world and entering into their context and actually getting to know them and moving beyond just this very superficial kind of Minnesota, general Midwest levels of relationships. And to do that, though, requires us to really be engaged. Tim gives these three distinctions of Christians in the world. That you have Christians who live in the city who are just like the rest of everybody else. They're completely indistinguishable. So if you came out as a Christian, they'd be surprised, And it's easy to live that way, and maybe many of us live that way in the city, or currently do, where you kind of hide your faith. You just live it's not a countercultural life, right? They couldn't see the gospel has any effect in your life because you don't live differently than anybody else lives. The other the other extreme on that front, which we all can suffer with as well, is we're so unlike our neighbors, so unlike our colleagues. Our lives are so different that we're unrelatable, right? It almost seems impossible to engage because they won't get me and I won't get them, and we couldn't be friends because we just don't have any shared. I'm so unlike. And this would be that kind of all you do is spend time with other Christians. All I'm doing is in Christian subcultures. I don't spend any time with anybody outside of my own kind of Christian worlds, and a lot of us went to Christian colleges, so we get this, what that does. But Tim is arguing for really this ministry model is this engaged life as Christians. We're integrated into the life of the world that we live in. We're integrated into our culture. We're integrated into our neighbors' lives, but we're distinct. We're still living in this countercultural way, giving a visible display of the gospel. But it really is with this real, genuine care and interest in these people in our spheres. And that was kind of what we talked about last week. A lot of those models that a lot of us grew up with in the 90s or 80s, it just wasn't sincere. You're just trying to save people versus really kind of trying to actually care and show interest in them. So then the final thing that kind of really goes along with this then is that it really requires time. Because if the goal is to develop these non-superficial relationships where they will see the gospel playing out in your life, because remember the first step is see it. They have to see it. So if they're going to see the gospel in your life, that takes time. Like, they don't see the gospel the first time they meet me. They don't see the gospel in my life, for a long time. That takes context, that takes time, that takes an observable life with others in which they can actually see how the gospel and how my faith affects me, changes me. All right, so with that comes hospitality. So here's Becky's moment. Come on up, Becky, please. So, the goal is really to talk very practical tonight about what hospitality looks like. Because it's one thing to enter into our neighbors' lives and engaging our neighbors and engaging the culture, engaging the city, engaging things. That's great. And we can develop a lot of relational integrity that way. But the ultimate goal, or the bigger vehicle, is this hospitality aspect, where we invite the stranger into our lives. Because that's how they're going to see things, is when they actually get invited into our lives. One of the big books that we would, recommend is this Rosario Butterfield. If you have this or read this before, The Gospel Comes with a House Key. That's a great book on kind of what a lot of this looks like. It can feel a little overwhelming at times, Rosario's picture of hospitality. So I thought it'd be also really helpful to kind of hear from Becky a little bit too, of just like, because I do well on the word side of things. I'm pretty approachable. I can approach our neighbors. I approach the kids in the high school with I can make friends pretty quickly. But we would have no relational integrity without Becky, And she's the one who really provides the hospitality in our lives and lets all these people in our various spheres feel really cared for, genuinely loved and thought of, not by me, but really by Becky. So I thought it'd be better to hear from her than just from me on how Becky does hospitality. Hey, you want to share some thoughts on hospitality?
Well, first, that's not true.
It's true.
So,
It's true.
yes, but we do have very different gifts and things that we think are valuable and important. So, I guess I thought, just speaking to the organic part of it, that for us, be able to be hospitable and to enter into people's lives, it had to fit with the rhythms of our life already. If we tried to add something that didn't fit in there, it wasn't sustainable. We couldn't keep those relationships. They weren't natural. They didn't feel authentic. They weren't organic. So that really, for us, because this was our life, limited us to our neighbors and people who did activities with our children. So we have some neighbors with kids, our kids' age. I would say that has been a very natural connection. We've been able to connect with them. Some of them are Christians and some aren't Christians, so then that creates another dynamic, which has been really lovely in our neighborhood, of having a community of believers to come alongside unbelieving neighbors and love them too. The other part is athletics for our kids. That's been a huge piece. We have specifically one family where their daughter plays soccer with Nora since they were 7 or 8 years old, and their son has played soccer with Charlie since they were 7 or 8 years old. So we see them multiple times a week. We carpool with them, and they're not believers. And we have been able to have, sitting on the soccer field with them, very meaningful conversations about how we parent, how we, our marriages, our church. I mean, even with the mom, her experience with church, and I mean, we've been through, she's had parents die, they've had a mother with Alzheimer's, they've gone through all these things, and we've been there alongside them because we naturally already were there with them. So I think that would be my first encouragement, is just to really notice the people already in your spheres. I even feel the woman who colors my hair. I mean, I have greater faith conversations with her than I do with almost anyone in my life, because I see her every couple months. And
Did she say this week she asked you specifically about what you thought of it?
yes, she said her mom started going to Eaglebrook. What do you think about a church like Eaglebrook? She asked me, and she's not a Christian. She was just on Love Is Blind, so she. Well, actually, she quit, so she's only on the first episode. But so she's got some moral compass things going on, but she knows that Lawrence is a pastor. She asks things about our kids all the time, and and it's a natural relationship. I'm already there, and it's authentic. We enjoy talking to each other, and I do pay her, but but otherwise, there's that. Yeah, so that would be my encouragement, is just kind of look in the communities you already have. Whether it's work or your neighbors, your kids' activities, your yoga class, right? Places where you already are. Because if you're looking in other places, it's going to be really hard to sustain it and make it part of your life. And I think the other piece is just that intentional piece. Even if it's a natural rhythm in your life, you still have to be intentional about it. And that is probably the hardest piece for us. We are not great at, especially with relationships, being intentional and following up and planning. We are really bad planners. But in order to actually do this, you have to put aside time in your life to make it happen. So we've tried lots of things. For a while, every Friday night, we set aside for having somebody over or planning something with somebody, and that actually didn't work that well.
Not the greatest.
But we do make it a point, if we're out for a walk and we see our neighbors outside, we stop and we talk to them. Or we do have a few neighbors that are very happy to come over 2 hours before dinner. We can text them and they're always up for dinner. So that works for us. The other unintentional people in our lives are the ones that it works easiest for us to have relationship with. But I think that's the reality, of any relationship, whether it's your marriage or your children or anything. If you're not intentional about it, it won't flourish. And so to create an authentic and meaningful relationship with someone, you have to be intentional about it. And that means it will take work and time and energy.
And you've cooked for a lot of neighbors.
Yes, and you cook for a lot of neighbors. Often it's like Lawrence is smoking ribs. Do you want to come over and have dinner with us? Because that's something we can feed a lot of people, and no one says no to smoked meat on the grill, right? So.
And a lot of times, you'll just send a text out or ask me if hey, should we invite over this set of neighbors tonight? We have a down night. Let's have, and they always say yes.
Yeah.
Neighbors always come over.
Yeah. Part of being intentional also for us is, we do sit down and talk about who in our lives do we need to be intentional about, and whether it's a neighbor or, we have family members also that are non-Christians that we intentionally try to engage with.
Right, because it's helpful to kind of think where are people that I know, and what do they need?
Yeah. Because we do probably have people in our lives who need to experience the gospel even more than some of the people we see regularly, but it wouldn't work. It doesn't work into our lives. So that relationship isn't fostered in the same way. We may pray for them and check in with them, but we're not able to see them weekly or often. And so it's just a different kind of relationship.
Do you want to share a little bit what does it not look like, hospitality, or what's some of the, because sometimes reading Butterfield, or I think it's easy to feel a lot of pressure to be hospitable.
Yeah. Well, for me, it doesn't, for me, it can't look like having dinner parties, or it can't look like, a coffee date with just one person or something. like that, where I'm taken out of my home and away from my family. And yeah, in this book, I mean, she's cooking for her whole neighborhood, right? So it doesn't even have to include food, right? It's just really this intentional act of being in relationship with somebody. And so I think, the gospel allows a lot of freedom for how it looks, right? And if it is organic and natural, that person's going to fit into what you're doing already. And that's what's going to work. And so it's not the grand gestures, right? It's not the huge parties or, right, going away for the weekend with them or those kinds of things, but it's really the day-to-day being in each other's lives.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, thoughts, comments, questions on hospitality, evangelism this way, any of these thoughts? You got Becky up here, you can grill for anything too, or just our additional thoughts when it comes to, loving our neighbors. Yeah, Katie. Hmm. Yeah. Do they ask you very often deeper questions? Yeah. 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 Totally. Well, and I guess I don't know. I think sometimes I maybe err too much on this side, but I think it's true though that I think sometimes they just need to see you. They need to see your family. They need to see how you and Blaine interact. They need to see how you talk about your kids, how you talk about your spouse. They need to hear those things. The desire to get into like the deeper conversation, maybe for my own sense of self-righteousness of like I want to, maybe old models dying hard of like, oh man, I really need to get them to a place of, or I want to press them. What I've encountered in a lot of relationships with non-believers is whenever I press into it, it goes nowhere. I think the kind of that, like Becky was saying, like there has to be this kind of like spontaneous or like more relational aspect to this of like, we're friends. Like, does this person trust me? Because if they trust you to have a deep conversation, they will have a deep conversation with you. Because everyone needs that in their life, and so it's really playing the long game, but it is like, and it's not really even playing the game. It's really just being friends. But of like, do they know you? Do they trust you? Do they call on you when everything hits the fan? Kinds of stuff. Like we had one neighbor, right? I did the funeral, right, for one next door neighbor when she died, because they didn't have anybody else. I was the only person they would think of, right, to come and, well, probably the only person they would let in their house, anyway, just a lot of stuff. But it's like, you want to be the one that they trust, or if there's a death in the family, or that was another neighbor, the dog had to put a dog down, and called me would I have lunch, talk about the dog. Yeah, let's do this. Let's talk about a dog. That's great, But it was their life, this dog, and so that gives an incredible opportunity, obviously, to talk about life and meaning. But I think it's not so much this like, how am I looking to find the right words or the right way to like get in or get deeper with people. I think it's a lot more, how am I establishing my relationships with these people to the point where they know me and they know my wife, they know my kids, they trust me, and they can see kind of like this kind of thing, like they know I'm a Christian, and they haven't run away yet, and that's a lot of our neighbors are very liberal, and you can see they're really hesitant over all these years to ask questions. They slowly keep doing it, but they're afraid of an answer, right? They don't ask because they're afraid I'm going to say something offensive, and then they're not going to be able to be friends with me anymore, And so you do need to just kind of establish this, it's a long road of establishing trust, and that, we can talk. We could talk about this. And we're not going to agree about all these things, but there's enough relational kind of glue. I don't know. You've been in conversations, with neighbors too and stuff. How do you handle the, getting into deep stuff or not getting into deep stuff?
Well, I'm not an amazing deep talker to begin with, but I think what I've noticed is I just think it's important that we're building, I don't want to sound cliche, but authentic relationships. So if you're really my friend, I'm calling you for help too. There's a trust, even though they're not a Christian and they might have a different worldview and a different way they approach things, I still trust them when I need help also. And so I think when I think of the people that we are in relationship with, I call them when I need help, and I'm vulnerable with them and when I'm struggling as well as, and that's how they learn to trust me too. And I think it is counterintuitive to our kind of evangelical Christian evangelism, right? To be seen as vulnerable, right? That somehow, I don't know, this is how I feel anyway, it's ingrained that as a Christian I have all the answers and I have it all together. But I think in order for people to really trust you, they need to see that that's not true. And so I think it is really this showing the side of you that they're struggling, the part of themselves that they don't want to show you, you kind of need to show them as well. And that seems to be how we build trust with those people. Yeah.
And that was good. That was a really good tip you gave. Yeah, should have given more. I guess could have given some more. Probably biggest evangelistic tips in your neighborhood: go for walks, regular walks every day at the same time. Do it. Just go for a walk every day at the same time. Because then, your neighbors start to see you, and you start to see them, but they start to see you, and then they actually feel like they know you before they know you. Then when you do talk to them, it's this kind of oh, yeah, I know, we see you all the time. Or, oh, yeah, you're the one with the, or for us, it's always our kids are in the front yard playing soccer, or Charlie, or something. Oh, yeah, you're in the house with the kid in the yard. He's always playing soccer. Oh, yeah, yeah. But go for a walk. Just go for a walk. And then the second tip was what Becky just said, though, too, of, ask for help. Ask your neighbors for help. When you anything, if you got a house project going on, neighbors love that. They love to come to your house and help you with a plumbing problem or anything. Or just stand there and problem solve and think. And that's how I've developed most of my relationships, I feel like, with a lot of the men in our neighborhood.
Or a tree falls down.
Oh, if a tree falls down? Oh, evangelistic gold. Oh, yeah, you know it. Yeah, everybody wants to come out to cut down that tree or stand there and watch you cut down that tree or talk, So no, anytime you get a chance, because I think there's sometimes that they're not going to invite you in, because that's not going to happen. So you got to kind of invite them in, but sometimes they don't want to just come over to have dinner or something. But if you have a project that you need help, that's a huge way in. Anyway, tips.
And just when we talk about people like our neighbors, we've lived next door to the same people for 13 years, right. And they still don't come in our house for dinner. Lawrence has to have a project for him to.
Oh, you're talking about
Dave and Kathy. Yeah. So.
No names, please.
Oh, sorry. But it can take a really long time. Yeah. And family, we've been married for a long time.
Many years.
Many years, right? And we still have family that we haven't been able to have real conversations with about it. But, yeah, but they still come, they still hang out with us, which is,
That's right.
Yeah.
But also, I think also there's the truth of the recognition, like you don't also have to be in a relationship with someone for 13 years. Like they may need to hear from you. They just may need to see from you the gospel. Cool. And then they're going to go down the path with somebody else, or this is going to get hit somewhere else too. Like you just got to be faithful with what you got and with who's in your sphere right now, and then just be genuine, just show love, just show care, and talk about the gospel. And that go back to that whole gospel fluency thing. Like if gospel doesn't come naturally out of your mouth, it will never come up in those conversations. So it just should be a natural thing where you can just naturally talk about the gospel all the time with anybody, believers or non-believers, because it's a part of who you are. Jose, did you have some?
Some thoughts and ideas that I'm learning. Maybe you said it before because I came in late, but just like your vehicle is not going to start because you got to put the key in the ignition.
Yeah.
So that's just a metaphor. Your vehicle is not going to start without the key. And it can be a very nice vehicle or
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I would just add, Jose. I think the one thing I would push on that a little bit. I agree, prayer, absolutely, but not general. I think getting into that, like instead of just praying, Lord, show me the people and opportunities today. Pray for people. Like you already know the people. Like God's already put them in your life. So pray for those people. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Go to the gym. Go to the gym. Like, yeah. Hmm. Sure. Sure. No, that's good. That's good, Jose. Nope. Sure. No, well, no, it's true. Good, Jose. No, it's true. I mean, it's easy to be in this world, but be unrelatable to it and to certain groups and people, and it does require prayer and courage to do it. Other thoughts, comments? Hospitality, Hannah? Oh, that's great. You want to?
Well, I don't know if I know the answer to that question, but it probably is worth thinking about. Like, is it a season of life thing, or are you in that unrelatable category, right? Like, have you isolated yourself from unbelievers? That would probably be the thing to think about and pray about, right? Because, right, the season of life, when you have young kids, right, you're not going anywhere. So it's hard to, like, actually connect with people, and even your neighbors, right? Like, that's just hard. So I guess that would be maybe the thing to pray about is.
And make some intentional, like I said, and being intentional. Like, we were intentional about soccer with our kids, like, because we were homeschooling, because we got to the place where we ended up our kids were in private school, and then they were public, private. We did a bunch. Everyone goes through school struggles. I feel like you all know it, get it. And so we landed on homeschool. All three ended up being homeschooled. But then we did feel then we wanted the kids to be active and involved and in the life of the city. And so we put them in St. Paul Blackhawks, like a city club soccer team that was near our house. And because we felt like, this will give us give them good exposure to, and it has, I think, all over these years, because they're also in like a homeschool co-op, which is its own subculture that needs the gospel. And then, but then they also have this, right, now they have this other group of friends, who are not the same subculture at all. So I think it is good to think of that a little bit of like, where do we have some point of contact? Do our kids have some point of contact? Do I have some point of contact? And that kind of gets back to the, like, last week of like, we have to engage the city and do what people are doing in the city and like they're doing in our communities. And so like, I need to be involved in what my neighbors are involved into to a certain degree, or involved in what other people are doing here too. So I have these points of contact. Otherwise, it just won't happen. So no, so I think that's wise. I think kind of like Becky said, it's like recognizing the season that you're in, and then recognizing, do I have any point of contact though with my culture, with non-believers? And if you don't, you need it. Hold on, let's all do that. I think Brenda had something too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And if you're older, it helps. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, Amy, I feel like you and Josh had that kind of dynamic too in your neighborhood, being the youngest. No, that's wise. Kayla? Mm-hmm. Except for you guys, yep. That's right. That's right. That's right. 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 Totally. Exactly. Totally. Because he is. He is doing stuff that we don't know about. And we don't know the state of our neighbors. We don't know the state of our friends. Even and our older neighbors too. And I would say too, like, we can't downplay friendship. Like, that's an incredible gift. Like, to be a friend to anybody is an incredible gift. So just being friends with your elder or older neighbors, that's good work. That's good work. Whether it goes into deeper levels of conviction around stuff, I mean, who knows? But because Kayla said, like, yeah, I find the spectrum or the kind of thing that's super helpful too, as a reminder of, like, I don't have to get everybody into this, like, level of, all right, today I'm going to give the gospel presentation to you, and you're going to confess your sin and come to believe in Jesus today. It just isn't the case anymore. It kind of was, again, it worked in summer camp. I remember it worked well at summer camp when everybody kind of was a Christian or came out of a Christian culture and understood sin and felt bad about stuff. But like we talked about, that's not the culture we're living in the city anymore. There isn't that shared understanding of sin and repentance and for forgiveness. So it just doesn't work. So seeing this, I think, is really helpful, and then just seeing, like, I'm going to have my role in here, but people are going to be at different stages in it. Really. All right, Jose, quick, because other people want to talk. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Totally. Totally. Yeah. Right. That's right. Yep. Sure. That's good. That's right. And there's a lot of things like that are just this, like, we have these everyday occurrences. Craig Butler's in there teaching right now, but it's like when we taught together at New Life, I mean, that lunchroom, teacher lunchroom, we're not going to waste that every day, right? It was an important time because you can have conversations and you can have fun and you can develop relationships, and let's do it. Take advantage of these little things. And so I think, we're out of time, but I think the big admonition or the big takeaway. Now, next week we're going to talk about challenges to all of this, and we really want to get into, like, what what makes this so hard, or what are the challenges that are like even like Tana brought up, like, stage of life challenges, challenges of, right, I don't know how to answer people's questions, or I don't know if I want to have non-Christian friends, or, I mean, there's challenges, living in the city challenges, there's all these things. But I think the big admonition from this week really is this, like, just thinking through, like, what are these relationships that you have? Like, you have them. We have relationships. We have people in our lives. Are we being intentional about developing non-superficial relationships with them? Are we not? Are there areas where we need to show more hospitality? Or are there areas where, because there are. Like, where do we need to grow in our hospitality? And what does that look like? And kind of like Jose even just said, like, it's going to look different for all of us because we're in different places. Our kids are into different things. We're into different things. So it's not going to look the same way that it looks for Becky and I to do hospitality as it's going to look for others if you don't have kids, or if you have young kids, or it's going to look different. But to be on the same page and to be prayerful about that, like, well, what does it look like for me at this stage, in this place, at this time, to be hospitable and to really reach out to neighbors? All right. We're out of time. All right. So next week, we'll talk challenges to things. So don't forget to get your kids before the end of the night here.